granniopteryx, granniopteryx. She knows the truth, she's linking every link.
Hello. A few days ago, I was speaking about the appointment of Jonathan Munro to replace Deborah Turness as BBC's head of news. I listed some of Mr. Munro's steps in his time at the BBC, one of which was his support for the appointment of Martin Bashir, the Diana hustler, as head of religious broadcasting. That seemed to me to embody everything that's gone wrong in the Beeb. And interestingly enough, just a couple of days ago, I came across a Daily Telegraph article about the Bashir business, which reminded me not only that Bashir's actions ended up propelling Diana to her early death, but they also wrecked a whole lot of lives of people around Diana at the time. And I thought I'd tell you about these tragedies just to remind you of the absolute evil that Bashir did in his ambition for his career, and the evil that the BBC not only countenanced, not only tried to hide, but also tried completely to erase and ignore. So, buckle up, this is going to take a bit of time. I'm Granniopteryx. Please like this video, please share it, please subscribe to my channel. If you're on YouTube, remember, click the notification bell. That helps keep the subscription alive. If you want to contribute financially, that's lovely. All the links are in the description. But really, clicking like, it's the best help for this channel. Okay, let's get on with talking about Martin Bashir and the people he destroyed. Okay, Martin Bashir, the man who constructed a framework of lies designed to weaken the princess into confiding in him. The man who presented calumnies about her friends and her employees that completely destroyed her trust in them. He cared not for the damaging effect those lies would have on the princess herself, nor does he seem to have spared much thought about the collateral damage on the innocent bystanders. Now, Diana was in any case a bit of a psychological mess. She'd had a very unsteady, you might even say traumatic childhood, which ill-prepared her for the role she'd taken on as the wife of the future king. And then, just 3 years previously to this interview, when her marriage was falling apart, her father suddenly died of a heart attack at a comparatively young age. All this must have been known to Mr. Bashir, and yet he had no compunction whatsoever about preying on the princess's feelings of desolation by convincing her that she was surrounded by conspirators. For instance, Bashir told her that Charles had been planning to murder both her and Camilla so that he could marry the nanny, Tiggy Leg Burke, with whom he was having an affair. He also convinced her that the liaison had resulted in a pregnancy and then an abortion. At some point in the interview, Diana says there were 3 of us in this marriage, and people often take it to mean Camilla, but it looks very much as if she was talking about Tiggy Leg Burke. Anyway, it seems that subsequently Diana dropped some, well, not very subtle hints about this liaison and the abortion at social gatherings. I believe at one point she walked up to Legberg at some sort of a gathering and she said, "I'm awfully sorry about the baby." You know, and this was in a party full of people. So the rumour followed Miss Legberg around until the whole truth of Bashir's machinations came out many years later. So Legberg was sort of soiled by this. The BBC ended up in 2022 having to pay the lady damages, a sum described by them as substantial. But it took them until 2022 to admit responsibility. Another casualty was Diana's secretary, Patrick Jeffson. Bashir convinced Diana that Jeffson was spying on her, and he resigned shortly after the interview along with his assistant Nicole Coquel. I suppose Diana would have had, well, he says he resigned, but I suspect that Diana made the atmosphere too toxic for him to stay around. The whole business had what you might call a deleterious effect on Mr. Jeffson's future career. And, of course, he's still tormented by the knowledge that Diana died believing he'd been betraying her. And in 2022, the BBC paid him compensation as well, a sum also described as substantial. And to give you the measure of Jeffson's character, he immediately donated all that compensation to a children's charity, in fact the last one with which Diana had been involved before she died. So, if you pay your licence fee, you can rest assured that all this dosh the BBC are ladling out in compensation, at least in this case, is doing some good. Doesn't that make you feel happy? Whatever the personal destruction that all of this caused. Another official in the firing line was Commander Richard Aylard, Prince Charles's private secretary, who Bashir said was paid both by MI5 and the broadcaster Richard Dimbleby to give him stories about Diana for a book he was supposed to have been writing. So Dimbleby got caught in this net as well. I'm sure he wasn't best pleased when he found that out. Then there was Alan Waller, an ex-employee of Diana's brother, who had allegations of disloyalty following him around after that interview for years. But I'd say vying for top place in the completely destroyed category are two men, Stephen Davis and Matt Wiessler. Stephen Davis was Diana's chauffeur, and Bashir convinced her so much of his disloyalty when he told Diana to get another chauffeur. Davis was fired with no explanation. He was devoted to Diana, and when the dismissal came out of the blue, he had no idea what he'd done wrong. It had such a bad effect on him. He ended up, so far as I could tell, mostly on the skids. And it was only when he saw the Netflix production of The Crown, which featured a scene in which Bashir told Diana that Davis was leaking information to the press, that he understood what had happened. Of course, the BBC knew about this years ago, but they made no attempt to contact him, even though in 2022, that is 2 years before that, they'd already admitted guilt and paid out to Jeffson and Aylard. When Davis himself got in touch with the BBC, oh yes, so sorry, and the BBC shelled out more substantial damages. Again, no sum has been specified, so I don't know whether whatever they gave him would have compensated for 30 lost, puzzled years. What do you think? Anyway, I said there were two in this category of destroyed little people. The second one is a graphic artist called Matt Wiessler. Stephen Davis was the man who didn't know what was going on when he was dismissed. Matt Wiessler was the man who did know what was going on, and so he was actively and deliberately cancelled by the BBC. Mr. Wiessler had been working for the BBC as a news and current affairs designer and director when Bashir asked him to create some mocked-up bank statements. Bashir implied he'd seen these statements but couldn't actually lay hands on them to take them away. But he explained it was something big to do with MI5. And Wiessler wasn't suspicious because fake documents were used in TV shows all the time for dramas and, as he thought in this case, for illustration. It was only after the famous interview that he realised the use to which these mock-ups had been put. He contacted the BBC about it just a couple of weeks afterwards. And guess what the BBC's response was? "Oh gosh, how terrible. We have to put this right straight away." Only joking. The BBC's response was to stonewall and then to circulate a secret instruction that on no account should Wiessler be employed by any department of the BBC ever again. He wasn't told of this, and he had no idea why his business was suddenly not getting the work. But the effects were devastating. After all, he was a media designer, and that's where his career was. He'd actually done work for Panorama, and the Beeb were the biggest employers of that sort of work at the time. Eventually, Wiessler's business folded. And he was also left with a lifelong sense of guilt for his part in Diana's subsequent spiral to destruction. So that's the story of some of the fallout from Bashir's machinations. Now to the article about the whole sorry business in the Daily Telegraph. You see, as we now know, it wasn't only the fault of the ghastly Bashir. It was the entire BBC directorate as well, who became aware through Matt Wiessler of Bashir's chicanery less than a month after the interview had been screened. But instead of further investigating and coming clean, they went into full lockdown on the truth. They ghosted the whistleblower, Wiessler, and exerted themselves mightily to cover any more tracks that might lead to their door. John Ware, who was a Panorama reporter in 1995, has recorded that there was gossip going round the BBC at that time, sort of generally around, that Bashir had got his interview by deceitful means. So quite a few within the corporation knew about it, but no one spoke up. And when one person tried to speak up, Wiessler, they shoved him away. According to Webb, concerns were first raised internally about Bashir in 1996, just 5 months after Panorama was aired. He tearfully confessed his nefarious tactics to senior bosses Anne Sloman and Tony Hall, so they knew everything. And Tony Hall went on to be Director General. But neither Sloman nor Hall did anything, concluding in a memo, "The Diana story is probably now dead unless Spencer talks." Hall then told the BBC, that is, Tony Hall told the BBC board that the forgeries had no part whatsoever in gaining the interview with the princess, describing Bashir as honourable. It was only when the corporation deceitfully tried to push the blame onto Earl Spencer that finally the truth started to emerge. It happened like this. In 2020, a writer and director called Andy Webb created a documentary called Diana Rama, all about the Bashir interview. He based it on documents from the BBC archives which he'd obtained under the Freedom of Information Act. It appears that Webb submitted the script of the programme to Earl Spencer. Remember, Webb had based his script on the documents in the BBC archives, which should have been recording what actually happened, the truth. But what one of the documents said was that it was Earl Spencer who'd shown the forged bank statements to a completely innocent Martin Bashir. That was in the BBC archive. As you know, Matt Wiessler had already told them who'd commissioned those forged documents, and it was in the BBC archive that Earl Spencer had given them to Martin Bashir. You can imagine what Spencer thought of that. He rang Webb up in a steaming fury and had a 40-minute conversation with him. The book says Earl Spencer did not at first criticise Bashir over the interview because he did not want to say anything that would question Diana's decision to speak to him. To come out as a strong critic of Bashir would have been in effect to paint his sister as a gullible fool, writes Webb. Far better to say nothing than to open a family rift. My personal opinion, that's a load of hokum. Spencer was the one who first saw the forged documents. And then he was the one who told Diana that Bashir was someone she should be talking to on the strength of those documents. I'm pretty sure that he kept quiet until 2020 because he realised he was the one who looked like the gullible fool. To be fair, he did ring Steve Hewlett, the editor of Panorama at the time, to ask if Bashir could be trusted. And Hewlett assured Spencer that Bashir was one of my best. But really, relying on Bashir's boss for the truth? What was Hewlett going to say? That one of his employees was a crook who was likely to pocket the teaspoon if you offered him a cup of tea? Spencer was certainly rich enough and influential enough to get a private detective to check out that story, and just a little bit of checking would have revealed the bogus bank statements for what they were. So I believe the Earl might have kept quiet until this day, until 2020 anyway, had not the BBC's attempt to rewrite history forced him to out himself. After all, it's probably better to be thought of as a gullible fool than to be thought of as the man who destroyed his own sister with a lot of dodgy documents. Anyway, that's the story, and that's its trail of tragedy, all caused by the ambitions of a man without scruples and a broadcasting company without morals. Till next time. You can help my channel by subscribing and clicking the notification bell. That's quite important. And by sharing if you're so inclined. Links to my other channels and to donation methods are in the description. But the best way you can help is simply by clicking like and notify. Thank you.